Hello, I am Enrique Sada, and this is Mexico Centered, a podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement was signed on November 30th of 2018. If ratified, the agreement would replace the North American Free Trade Agreement, which went into effect on January 1st, 1994. The USMCA, as the new agreement is known, was ratified by Mexico earlier this year, but the United States and Canada have yet to do so. With the presidential election coming up in a little over a year and the primary election season coming much sooner, pressure is mounting and time is running out for the Trump administration to see the agreement ratified by the U.S. Congress. What is holding Congress back in the ratification process? What is the window of opportunity to pass the agreement given the upcoming 2020 election? And if such a window were to close without the agreement having passed, what is the future for USMCA? With these questions in mind, it seemed like a good time to sit down with David Gantz once more and also ask a few more questions regarding the contents of USMCA in relation to current events. David Gantz is the Will Clayton Fellow in Trade and International Economics at the Baker Institute. He is also the Samuel M. Feckley Professor of Law at the University of Arizona's James E. Rogers College of Law and Director Emeritus of the International Trade and Business Law Program. Gantz has written extensively on NAFTA trade law issues and dispute resolution. Here's our conversation. David Gantz, Will Clayton Fellow in Trade and International Economics at the Baker Institute, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
So, as a presidential candidate, President Trump heavily criticized NAFTA with characteristic hyperbole as one of the worst trade agreements ever made. Once in office, he was quick to announce the start of the renegotiations, and this was back in January of 2017, and that year in August, the first round of negotiations took place. But it wasn't until November 30th of 2018 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where the three countries, or the three leaders of the countries, signed the agreement. So it's been a long process, and almost a year later, the agreement still is sitting around. It has not yet gone to Congress, and so NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, continues to be the agreement that trade relations in North America are under. Mexico did ratify already the agreement in July, and Canada is in the process of doing so. Why doesn't there seem to be more of an effort to get the agreement through, or what is holding Congress back?
I think it's a fairly complicated set of issues. I would just point out this is not at all unusual. To put a trade agreement of this complexity and sensitivity together in less than 2 years is actually pretty much normal. It's about what it took for NAFTA. I think it's sensitive because trade agreements are controversial in the United States. You have certain constituencies that are all in favor of liberalizing trade by lowering tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and you have other constituencies that are much more worried about protecting domestic labor, protecting American farmers, protecting the environment in the countries with which we have trade agreements, and some, probably including people in the Trump administration, who are afraid that trade agreements are going to encourage American companies to find lower wage cost countries in which to manufacture things. And this one, I think, is made even more complicated by the fact that as time goes on, we're getting closer and closer to a presidential election.
So I actually wanted to address it. So the federal election is coming up in November of 2020. We are 5 months away from the primaries, 10 months away from the national conventions, and 14 months away from that election. So what's the window of opportunity here to ratify the agreement, given what most certainly would be a heated campaign season?
In my view, the window of opportunity is between now, early September, and let's say Thanksgiving. It seems to me if it can't be done between now and then, it gets too close to the primaries, as you have mentioned. And what's more important is it makes the number of Democrats who today would probably vote in favor of the agreement much more reluctant to do so because they think they'll be attacked by their opponents either in primaries or in the general election.
So this was an agreement that was it seems like there was a lot of rhetoric around it, and it was touted as a great victory, although many people said it was just a NAFTA 2.0, right? But what is happening? Is there not enough support in Congress to pass this? What Republicans thinking regarding the USMCA? President Trump has been vocal about his position in trade in general, which seems to be kind of against it, but of course he's in favor of the USMCA. What are Republicans thinking about?
I think it's more a question of there being a few very sensitive issues where the Democrats have said we want to see in the implementing legislation, in a side agreement, enforcement measures in particularly relating to Mexican labor practices and to Mexican environmental practices and a few other issues. And there have been negotiations going on between the Trump administration, the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and Chairman Pelosi and some committees in the Congress over the details of some of these provisions. And as one Democrat said, the issues are enforcement. And he means labor and environment. And as long as those issues aren't resolved, the implementing legislation can't be sent to the Congress, and until that's sent, the Congress can't hold hearings. In my belief, once the legislation goes forward, the votes are there, both on the House and the Senate. But until the legislation goes forward, until Ms. Pelosi believes that her constituents, or at least her colleagues, are sufficiently satisfied, nothing's going to happen.
So this is more of on the Democrat side holding this back.
Yeah, well, obviously the president and his supporter and his colleagues, Ambassador Lighthizer at USTR, are the ones who negotiated the agreement. And I wouldn't say that Republicans are entirely happy with the agreement. They don't like the investor-state dispute settlement provisions, and they have raised some questions about some of the other aspects. But by and large, they feel, as do many Democrats, that this is a much better agreement than NAFTA, and it's very important for the United States as well as Canada and Mexico to have a continued process where you have supply chains and there is access to at least one low-wage cost country, which of course is Mexico. So I think for Republicans, probably there are fewer objections than for Democrats.
So in the enforcement issues that Democrats are worried about, would that be solved? Does that need to be sent back to the drawing board with Canada and Mexico to make sure that everyone's in agreement, and also have to pass those in the corresponding legislatures?
My best guess is that nobody really wants to reopen the agreement, not Canada, not Mexico, and not the U.S. So it's either going to be resolved through provisions in the implementing legislation or possibly through a side letter, which is, again, just a type of agreement. And unless one thinks that's unusual, there are already about 30 side letters in the package as it is. So adding one or two on labor or environment would not be that significant, assuming Mexico and or Canada would agree to it. So I don't think operationally, legally, it's not a big issue. There are ways to do this without causing a lot of problems.
So we appear to be entering a period of economic slowdown. So there may be some uncertainty in the markets. Is it a good time now to ratify the USMCA, or is it better to continue under NAFTA for the time being? To what extent does this kind of situation where there's uncertainty about the USMCA itself, or when it will take effect, contribute to the current situation?
I haven't talked to a single Democrat who thinks that NAFTA is better than USMCA. I think even those who may not support the agreement think that particularly the labor and environmental provisions, but probably also auto rules of origin, which means probably there'll be more autos and auto parts made in the U.S. in the future, are much better than the existing agreement. With Republicans, it's probably less obvious, but I think most of them, on balance, would agree with a lot of neutral observers, which is this agreement has its downsides, but on the whole, it is better than NAFTA. And if nothing else, after 27 years of NAFTA, there are a lot of things like treatment of data, for example, and intellectual property that could well have been improved by a new agreement. And this agreement does that.
So in regards to the content of the agreement and some current events that are playing out right now, farmers they have been hurt by the current trade wars. They have lost some markets that are crucial to their industry, and they are wanting this new trade agreement to be passed, to be ratified. In what ways does this, or how does the USMCA help them in ways that NAFTA didn't?
With agriculture, there have not been major changes. The only really significant one, in my view, is that Canada has agreed to open up part of its market for milk solids to U.S. producers, which is not the case under NAFTA. The last time I looked, Canada was the biggest agricultural importer from the U.S., and Mexico was third. Now I'm sure that with China dropping out of this picture, Canada and Mexico are by far and away the two largest markets for U.S. agricultural producers. And so for them, the thing to do is to maintain where we are or improve it slightly, which would be true under USMCA.
So I also wanted to ask about corruption in the anti-corruption part of the USMCA. So the López administration in Mexico has been vocal about fighting corruption, and they have taken some credible steps and important steps in doing so. How does the USMCA address the issue of corruption in Mexico? What are the major points here?
USMCA, like many of our post-NAFTA agreements, does have a corruption chapter. NAFTA did not. How much impact this will actually have in Mexico, I think, is very, very hard to say. I think basically the issue of rooting out corruption in Mexico is up to the López Obrador administration and its supporters. It's as everybody is aware, this is an endemic problem in Mexico, from president down to the customs officials and the cops on the beat. And whether or not López Obrador can make major inroads is still, I think, uncertain after whatever it is, 9 months being in office. I think USMCA helps. How much it would help is really hard to say. It's hard for me to believe that a U.S. administration, either this one or the next one, is going to come down hard on Mexico on corruption issues the way it may well come down hard if the new labor provisions are not followed.
So why does a trade agreement include a chapter like this? What are the benefits of having a trade agreement? Or is it related to that, or is it related to something else?
You mean corruption or labor?
Corruption.
The idea, I believe, is that the U.S., if it uses this legal language effectively, might be able to put pressure on some governments to change their policies, or at least think seriously about changing their policies. Again, I'm not sure how well it works. This language, for example, I believe you have in the agreement with Central America and the Dominican Republic, and several of the Central American countries are among the most corrupt governments in the world, and there doesn't seem to be much possibility for change. And a lot of it depends on who is president and whether he or she feels that corruption is an issue that the U.S. should be pressuring other countries on in terms of getting rid of it.
So, and lastly, if the USMCA is not ratified before the campaign season begins, do you think that let's imagine if President Trump were not to be reelected, what do we expect to happen with something like this? Do we expect provisions to be added to this, or just be scraped and start over?
I think it's a very good question. Again, there are many who feel that if we don't get this agreement through Congress by Thanksgiving or so, that it won't be taken up again until after January 2021. And if Mr. Trump is president at that point, presumably he would proceed. If it's somebody else, I think it depends on who that person is. My guess is there would be at that point a lot of pressure from the business community, from farmers, and maybe from some union interests who think that the agreement would bring more auto industry jobs back to the United States. So my guess would be eventually it would go forward. Now, there have been other agreements not nearly as important where it's taken 4 or 5 years between the time they were concluded and the time they were actually approved by the U.S. Colombia, Panama, South Korean bilateral agreements were negotiated around 2006, and they didn't get approved until 2011 for a variety of political and other reasons. So it wouldn't be unprecedented. I think the big concern, if something doesn't happen between now and the end of the year, is whether Mr. Trump would revise his view that we should get rid of NAFTA entirely in retaliation. I personally don't think that's likely to happen. I think it's quite clear that the U.S. economy is beginning to slow down, and I think his advisors, even those who are highly protectionist, would say, wait a minute, we don't want to put any further strain on U.S. manufacturing and U.S. jobs than we already have. Therefore, it's not a good idea to get rid of NAFTA. But that's just a guess.
Right. David Gantz, thank you so much for answering these questions about the USMCA and the whole process.
Thank you for having me.
That was David Gantz. The Center for the United States and Mexico held an event on September 5th to discuss the next steps for the USMCA. Our guest, U.S. Representative Kevin Brady of Texas' 8th Congressional District, talked about the challenges to ratifying the agreement. David Gantz moderated the conversation. If you wish to see video of the event, you can visit the Baker Institute's website, bakerinstitute.org, or you can find the link in the show notes. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at mexicocentred@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.